I love both of these methods, stretching and folding and no knead. I think they've both got their place. And here you can see two loaves that I've baked in previous videos using the two different techniques. But the biggest question I ask myself is, how much time do I have? If I'm going to be at home, then I'm going to incorporate some stretching and folding. But if I'm going out for the day, that dough needs to look after itself. So it's going to be a no-knead method. Now, I think these comparisons are fun and hopefully encourage you to experiment at home to see what works best for you and for your schedule. And if you've got any ideas for future comparison videos, then let me know in the comments. So I'm going to make up two identical doughs with a hydration of 70%. So nothing crazy, just a nice manageable dough that's going to make a smallish 750 gram sourdough loaf. We've got 256 grams of water followed by 98 grams of starter, which has been fed at 100% hydration last night using the scrapings method. And if you haven't seen that, I'll link to a video in the card above and on the end screen at the end of the video. And after a quick stir, I'm going to add 9 grams of sea salt. Some of you have mentioned that when you add your salt to the bowl, the starter clumps a little bit. Well, mine does too. It doesn't worry me because it breaks down through the fermentation period. But if it does bother you, then just blend your salt with the flour and then add it to the bowl. In we go with 387 grams of strong white flour. Mine's got a protein content of 13%. I'm going to bring this dough together with a spoon, followed by a mix with my hand. I want to make sure all of the ingredients are combined properly before covering. Now, I've made two identical doughs up. They've both been treated in exactly the same way. Now, they're sitting out on my work surface covered at room temperature, which is 18 degrees Celsius today or 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, 40 minutes after the dough has been mixed, I'm going to do one massive stretch and fold or lamination. And for the benefit of this comparison, I'm going to go a little crazy. Now, I love this specific dough. The 70% hydration partnered with this specific flour makes a really manageable dough. It's already built strength up in that short period that it was sitting on the worktop. So I'm going to pop it back in its bowl for another covered rest. So 30 minutes later or so, round two for the stretching, exactly the same thing again. And I would just like to say I really appreciate the feedback about the sourdough calculator. As I'd explained, it's at the beginning of its journey, but your input was fantastic. And as it's developed further, I'll keep you updated by email. If you aren't subscribed or you're interested in having a look at the calculator, then the link will be in the video description. So last big stretch, and I can really feel the strength this dough has built up now. The dough is still elastic, but it wants to recoil back at this stage. It's nice and smooth and it's a real pleasure to handle. So that was the last stretch. It's going to go back into its bowl now, covered for the bulk proof. Right, the bulk fermentation's finished and it's time to shape. First up is the dough that's been stretched and folded, and I've got to say it handles beautifully. It stretches out nicely without tearing and recoils back gently. It's smooth, it's supple, and you can feel the energy in the dough. And if you're watching this and you're thinking about baking your first loaf of sourdough, this is the sort of dough that you want to handle. So same process with the no-knead, and this is the first time I've actually touched this dough since mixing, and I can feel a difference. This dough feels nice, but it's definitely more relaxed and a touch tacky, although it's not sticky, that's for sure. It doesn't want to recoil so much after it's been stretched. It's still smooth and easy to handle, but it feels a little lifeless when comparing it to the other dough. These are going to prove at room temperature for 2 hours and then go into the fridge overnight, and I'm not going to cover them in the fridge. So some of you have asked why I'm not covering my dough when I put it in the fridge overnight. Now, this is just something that I'm playing around with at the moment, and I have to say it's worked really well for me if I'm baking the bread the next morning. But I will have a comparison video coming soon where I prove that dough covered and uncovered, and we'll dive a bit deeper then. Right, so bake time for both of these doughs, and they're both going to get exactly the same treatment. The oven and the baking stone have been preheated to 220 degrees Celsius or 430 degrees Fahrenheit. After turning out the dough, I'll give it a quick score before sliding it onto the baking stone and baking it for 20 minutes covered and 30 minutes uncovered. Now, this is the second noticeable difference for me, and I'm not sure how well you can see it on screen, but the dough that's been stretched that's on the right of your screen, it just sits up a little bit more than the no-knead. It's got a touch more volume. And when I score the dough that's been stretched, it cuts a touch more cleanly. Whereas the no-knead has just got a bit more tendency to sag. So the first one out of the oven is the no-knead, followed shortly by the loaf that was stretched. And just so you know, I've actually repeated this side-by-side bake 3 times this week to make sure the outcome wasn't random. Now I think the volume is the noticeable difference between the two loaves. The dough that was stretched has bloomed a lot more than the no-knead, and the stretched loaf has more volume. It's a plumper loaf. And funnily enough, when you handle these loaves, when you pick them up, the no-knead feels a touch denser, a little heavier, while the loaf that was stretched definitely just feels that little bit lighter. Now I'm not sure if I'd noticed that difference if I'd baked them separately. The development of the crust looks similar on both loaves. I cut a slice from the same section of each loaf, and you can really see the difference in volume here. I prefer the crumb on the loaf that was stretched, but that's still a pretty good crumb on the no-knead as well. And when I taste them, I can't detect any textural difference either in the crust or the crumb. Of course, I'm still going to use a no-knead method, but I think these side-by-side comparisons are really interesting because we can see what we might be gaining or losing in each scenario. Now, if you want to see how I use the no-knead to fit in with my daily routine to help me out with scheduling, then click on this video here. And if you want a waste-free way to maintain your sourdough starter, then you can watch this video here. A huge thank you for watching. I'll see you again very soon. Stay tuned.